I'm president of a firm called Shelter Island Risk Services, and we provide information systems and assist people in the technology of gathering the data they need and in the analytics to use it in ways that I think they should. We also are involved in the ERM world. But the purpose of this morning is really kind of an appetizer of one of the areas that we are working hard to develop in conjunction with RIMS. And it's really focused on how data that most of us have can be converted to be a more valuable asset. Let me just start with the fact that myself and Josh are here on Shelter Island, which is an island off the eastern end of Long Island, so we're about as far from the west coast as you can get and stay in the U.S. And I'd like to very quickly, and I know we want to try to get a lot accomplished in the time allotted this morning, but I'd like quickly for you to introduce yourselves, your firm, and in 30 seconds or so, a little background so we all have a better sense of who's participating. And Alec, you were first in the call, so I'll let you start.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Alec Grandin. I work for Ameren Risk Management Corporation. We're a risk pool administrator for a tribal risk pool that has over 400 tribal entities across 32 states. We provide risk management services across lines, traditional lines such as homeowners, auto, workers' compensation, and including emergency management and preparedness.
Yeah, good. And Joanna, your background or your company?
I'm sorry?
No, I was moving on to Jelena.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
My name is Helena Ramsey. I am from True Blue, which is located in Tacoma, Washington, and we have 5 underlying brands underneath us, and the company is operating in providing temp services in basically whole United States and including Puerto Rico and Canada. And my position is a workers' comp financial analyst. So this particular seminar would be, but turned to be webinar, is a high interest for me because I am looking into the way how to present worker comp data in a slightly different ways that we are doing currently, and I'm just very interested to see and absorb some of the ideas that hopefully will be presented here.
Okay. And Julie, a little bit about your.
Hi, I'm Julie Yant. I'm with Grant County Public Utility District. We're also in Washington State, in Central Washington. We operate 2 large hydroelectric projects on the Columbia River. And my position, I'm insurance. I manage the insurance program for the district and also claims management. The district is looking at more fully developing their ERM program and just looking at ways to present data or collect, better analyze the data that we have now.
Oh, very good. I think we're all on the same page, and hopefully the technology will allow us to walk through this process. Let me start with a slide that we probably could spend a day on, let alone maybe a week as well. But it portrays, in my opinion, the progression that we've seen in the risk management industry. And let me just also make sure, is the sound coming through okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. When I got into the industry, and to some degree it's still true, that hearsay and opinions are really the essence of what people are reacting to. But over the period of these decades, we've moved up from standard reports to ad hoc reporting, where you can basically get the reports that you want. We've moved into alerts, and now more and more scorecarding and benchmarking. And frankly, the discussion we're going to have this morning really starts where the white dots are, where we're moving into more not what happened, because you have the data, everybody knows what happened. The real issue is going to be what to do about it, and what's the strategy to try to make things better. And that's going to be the theme of this seminar. This morning, we're going to extract some pieces of what would normally be a 2-day program. So obviously we're not going to cover everything in the same detail unless you want to spend the Easter weekend with a phone in your ear. But the thing I'm talking about is something I call data fingerprinting, where we really look at the data and try to learn more about what the data is trying to tell us rather than what we think the data is from the get-go. And I'll give you some examples that I hope will find interesting toward some claim structures and some reporting methods that we can share. I always think about this because people, I think, have an inordinate sense that they really do know their data, that they have it in spades. And my experience has normally been that when you really get into it, they often don't know their data, or they certainly don't have enough information to do the job that they probably should. And I kind of pull back to something that every one of us, I think, can relate to, that even questions as basic as these: is your hand the same size as your face? A lot of people would say no, it's much smaller, but in fact it is the same. If you put your hand across your face, you'll realize that it covers your face. I'd ask you which 2 fingers are equal in length. And I'm going to give you the answer, but you probably would guess something different because it's your little finger and your thumb should be equal. If these are wrong, then you have to somehow get traded in for a new hand. And I'll go through your arms actually do go below your waist. Your ears are quite big for most people. They extend from your eyebrows to the base of your nose. And the easy question there, of course, everybody knows that the Simpson characters only have 4 fingers. But if you get stumped on those kinds of things in an environment where all of us, all the time, are exposed to the answers, then gosh help us with respect to some of the data we have. So I believe it's almost one of the 11th commandment is to know your data. And the only way to know your data is to work with it on a very substantial way with the right tools. If without that, you're never gonna get the information that I think you will need. And I also want to say in this format, it's informal. It's a small group of people. You all have very good backgrounds, and I want you to be very comfortable to raise a question or a comment. I don't want this to be a one-way exchange. I really would like to get as much from your background and your thoughts to direct the program as possible. So I don't know if there's a way that you can indicate you have a question or you just want to chime in on the call. There's a chat box. We'll watch for that because, again, the most important aspect of this whole program is to communicate to you. I'm not trying to sell anything except the concepts that I've developed over these years. Now, we all see with our eyes. That's a truism, and I think we tend to forget that in a lot of the reporting that's done within the risk community. This chart you're looking at, and I know there's a lot on here, but it's valuable to concentrate data because it allows your mind to capture it in a more holistic way. This is an example of a scorecard, and what's important here is not the specific items that you'll see on the screen, but the concept that you're putting a lot of different criteria together and measuring it over time. So you could see trends, you could see information that would give you a better sense of the direction of your program. And this is, of course, divided between indemnity claims and medical-only claims. And I'll leave it to you to see some of the criteria that we've developed, and I think you'll find that it's somewhere between 12 to 15 criteria is a good way to capture the nature of your program. Is anybody, in looking at this, have any particular questions about the criteria that are being used here across my policy years? Well, so I won't delve too much into that, but you can see I'm trying to track criteria that measure different dimensions of the claims. But I think this next slide is more in tune with what I think is the direction of our industry. And that's to put a number of graphs and tables and statistics together in one place with on the right-hand side the ability to use checkboxes to control the nature of the information that's being presented. This is not risk data, but it could be. And I think there's a fallacy that's been demonstrated that the human eye can absorb a tremendous amount of information, and it's far more effective at that absorption when it's put into a structure like this, where they're all these things are together, as opposed to the typical PowerPoint where you show one slide, then you show another graph here, the next slide, and the next slide, the next slide, and your brain, as I will show you, it very quickly erases its memory of that short-term memory, and it has a very hard time assimilating all this information together. So in terms of the question that Jelena raised about showing workman's compensation data, my first theme would be concentrated, and then allow people to peel back when they need more detail. But we're finding far more ability to work with programs like this, which is software that we provide, than like I say, the typical PowerPoint approach. So those comments really relate to the display of data. Let me talk a little bit about statistics, which are the kind of the underbelly of our whole industry. Why people care about statistics, I think, relates to the fact that statistics are really the foundation of insurance and risk management. From the very beginning in the 1500s, when they started worrying about ships making it across the Atlantic, they were cognizant of how to control their statistics by putting cargo on more than one ship. It was better to have your cargo on 5 or 6 different ships. The probability would be higher that it would be a successful journey than putting the cargo on one ship and the possibility that it would sink. So statistics. It's a term everybody uses, but it's actually a fairly precise term. The statistics are what we use to summarize data. And so when I talk about an average, the average could represent 30,000 claims, or it could represent 100 Indian tribes. It's a way to put a number around a body of data. And it's also a way of summarizing experience over time, so that we have we can talk in terms of, as we always do, in terms of weather, in terms of stock market performance. The statistics provide us the ability to look back in time and extrapolate trends and look into the future. Really, the world of statistics began with the juncture between the Renaissance, which started to look at information and data to make decisions, whereas before that, things were done by throwing bones and some kind of omens and the nature of whatever they were. So statistics have a huge impact on our industry, but they also have to be used carefully, because a lot of people, I think, misunderstand how to make these applications. When I was working in an environment where we had a substantial safety and loss control function, one day the loss control guy said, there's this plant down in Arkansas, and they really have a problem because we're getting about 95% of the injuries in this plant are coming from these female workers. So we've got to get somebody down there and figure out what the heck is going on, because they need training. They obviously need a careful inspection of employees, but this is just out of hand. And he had a loss run that demonstrated that, in fact, of course, 95% of the claims were coming from the women workers. But whoever was smart enough to show up at the plant began to realize that about 100% of the workers in the plant were women. So the fact that we were getting that proportion of claims was hardly a surprise. But we make those kind of mistakes all the time with respect to looking at claims without recognizing the hidden and underlying factors that are the exposure variables that ought to be used to evaluate them. So, central measures are what we use to try to evaluate data. And the two that are the most common are the mean, or what we often call the average. Our alternative to that are the median, which is the point where 50% of the data are greater and 50% of the data are smaller than the median. Now, in our program, and I'll ask you this question, would the mean be higher than the median or lower than the median in your experience?
Well, this is Helena. I would say it depends on what is the repetitiveness of median. You know, if I have, you know, out of the number of 10, if I will have 5 medians, the number 5, you know, my mean would be lower.
Right.
It depends on how many times my median is repeated.
That's true. Anybody else have a thought? Alec, do you have any feeling about what the average claim, say average claim cost compared to the median claim cost would be?
For us, the average is lower than the median.
Interesting.
More often than not. I can't say that across the board, but so we have many more lesser costing claims than we do high price claims from a claim.
Okay, no. Well, I respect your experience. It's obviously a little unique. I'm trying to remember if I don't think I have got the slide I wanted, but I'm going to jump back to this. Let me just leave this on the table, and you can look at your own data at some point. Alec may be absolutely right with respect to his own. There's no absolute rule here. But my experience with workman's compensation is that the mean is normally 2 to 3 times higher than the median. And the reason for that is that, I think, Alec, you said it a bit, you have so many small claims that influence the distribution, but the big claims, the 100, 200, 500,000, $1 million claim, pull that average way up. And it's one of the dilemmas in risk financing is that most of your claims are, in fact, small. I may have a slide later. I don't remember if I put it in here. But here are some numbers, and I think they're fairly reasonable, where an average lost time claim is, say, about $45,000 in its value on average. The median, that is the claim, a lost time claim that splits half the data is below, half the data is above, is around $15,000, which means that when you have to charge $40,000 on average to cover the cost of the claims, but most people out there are seeing claims a lot smaller because that's the volume. It's an analogy that if we were in the same room and we took our salaries, okay, and we added them together and we came up with an average, if Donald Trump came into the room, that average would go up a hell of a lot, I think. But the median probably wouldn't change nearly as much. So I think these are useful concepts to deal with because they help you better get a sense of the data you're working with. And as homework for this assignment, I will ask you to look at a data set for data valued at a certain point in time And there's a function, a median function in Excel, and of course there's an average function. See whether or not your mean and median follow this pattern that I just stated. And I also want to make a quick comment about percentiles, and I think these can be very useful in a lot of situations. Let's say you're trying to track the performance of your program, and you want to know how many claims are reported within 3 days. Pick the day. I'll just say 3 days. So you look at your data, and what I really be interested in is the percentage of claims that happen within 3 days. Because if I worry about the average delay time, just like I mentioned a moment ago about severity and average size claim, your average claim will be influenced by that 1 or 2 claims that are a year or two lagged in their reporting. So keep in mind these differences, because I think they will help you better understand the data and better put some bounds around the value of an average. An average can often be a very distorted, and I call it the flaw of averages. So keep that in mind when somebody's talking about averages. I'm not going to spend much time. You know how to calculate an average, and this is what this slide represents. And by the way, if you want these slides, I'd be happy to provide them to you. We're not going to get through all of them in detail. Here, this slide here, which shows what on the left-hand side, a normal distribution. I don't know why they call it a normal distribution. There's nothing particularly normal about it, but it's what everybody likes to think about when they think about statistics. But the main issue with a normal distribution is that the average and the median are the same. That's very valuable. But I will tell you that the distribution on the right-hand side that shows you that you have a lot of activity that's small, and then it peaks, and then you have a tail. It's called the tail of the distribution. Those are the type of distributions that always, and I'll stand behind this, always occur in claim-related statistics. They are almost never normal. The cost of claims almost always follows that kind of a distribution, and we can work with it. It isn't a problem. It's just a need to recognize that you're going to find that a relatively small amount of your claims control a huge amount of the total cost and severity. So we've gone through medians, and I won't belabor this. This is just a good definitional slide. Here's a slide. I mentioned this, and I won't spend a lot of time on it because I already talked about it, but take this to heart. This, to me, is a very normal, I should say normal, a very expected kind of distribution for workman's compensation. And that's where I'm saying that in the lost time cases, about 50% of the claims are at $15,233 or less. These are the percentage of claims moving up from the bottom. But because there got, as always, there's very large claims in the mix, the average is about $40,000, or nearly 3 times the size of the median. Any questions, rebuttals? Hearing none.
This is Helena. Can you please just go, maybe just repeat the same slide? MO means,
oh, sure.
And LT is just, interesting to know.
No problem. In workman's compensation, claims are, lost time and medical
only. Oh, I'm with you. Thank you.
Okay, great. No, I want you to jump in anytime. There's no point in us not covering these things. And I didn't focus on the medical only, but I think you'll find, although of course the numbers are a lot smaller, it's a similar kind of pattern. The median is about $382, and the average or the mean was about close to $900. So.
And when you're talking, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
And when you're talking, about standard deviation and frequency, I know exactly what those numbers mean. But for the purpose of claim analysis in the risk data, well, what is the usefulness of standard deviation and standard and mean deviation?
Probably not very much as it stands on its own. So, I would probably wouldn't even have a good reason to put it on this chart. Mm-hmm. But it does have an important value because if TrueBlue is trying to analyze its total program, you have to have a sense of how much potential variation there is in the various classes of claims. I'll get to something a little bit later using a computer program that where the standard deviation would give you an insight to the probability. Like, I don't know your numbers, but let's say there's a $50 million expected cost of workman's compensation, given a retention of $1 million. Mm-hmm. Well, everybody, the first thing I would want to know if I were a CFO is, great, Lena has this $50 million estimate, but what could it be? Could it be 60 million? Could it be 90 million? Could it be 100 million? If how much variation? And there's with this kind of an approach, you can provide those kind of answers. Mm-hmm. Because the one thing, I don't know anybody who is honest and does forecasting that wouldn't admit the one thing that they are certain about is that the number that they forecast is not the number that's going to occur. There's always going to be variation. And I think the statistic you looked at, the standard deviation, is a way to get a sense of that potential variation.
And we are talking in regards to development costs. For example, if I'm looking at X policy year and I say, hey, development costs for these claims would be 15 million, but I can use standard deviation in order to estimate what it can be. Is that the idea?
Yes, it applies to that, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Actuaries don't do this as much as they should, in my opinion, and that's another subject.
Okay.
We're moving into an area that, honest to gosh, I have tried over my whole career to communicate this concept, and I'll admit I haven't been as successful as I would like. So you folks represent an audience, and I want to try very hard to explain what I'm up to, and it fits just into the conversation we just had. When you talk about risk, or total losses, there's always a frequency component. How many losses did you have? And there's always a severity component. What's the cost per loss or per claim? This applies to product liability, to workman's compensation, automobile liability, to property. Every risk-type problem always has a frequency dimension, how many events occurred, because if you get less events, you're going to get less cost normally, and also then a distribution of the cost per event. Looking at your data, we can come up with these kind of distributions. Like looking into the future, we think that over all the tribes, they're going to have 5,000 workman's compensation claims next year. And we know, or we think we know, that the average value of those claims is X, and there'll be some variation around that. This is called computer simulation, and the computer works to develop those two distributions and tests in sequence the process that is the same process that you experience in real life. Everybody's going to have a certain frequency, and everybody's going to have a certain number of claims, each with a severity. And then we can calculate the probabilities that the combination will take on various values. It's not rocket science. This graph, which I'm proud of, I made in about 1978. So the concept has been around all of that time. And it's somehow we need to get more involved in using the data we have to better get an understanding of the consequences, both financially and in terms of loss control and safety and all the rest. But I would be happy to spend more time on this. I just emphasize that, and I'll show you an example that may help when we. Well, let me try to go to that example. Just a moment, please. I'm going to talk with the. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I've got a program I'd like to show you quickly that may make this a little more clear. I don't know if Will and I, can you read that properly? Is that okay?
Yes.
All right. Great. What I've done here is I have taken, on the very top, the aggregate distribution. This is working with a client. Okay, very hard to see. I just hit Control Alt plus. Let's stop doing this. Just we're trying to get the screen a little bigger for you. Yeah. And don't focus on the numbers. Focus on the concept. This started out with let's say it's workman's compensation just for purposes. We had a distribution of how many claims we expected to happen, and we had a distribution of the cost per claim. And the little graph there in column D shows you the results that occurred when we let the computer simulate a large number of times. I probably did this 1,000 times to get the distribution. And what we can see here is that we had about the 95% level is about $2.1 million. At 95% of the time, the distribution in total was less than $2.109 thousand. So then I said to myself, well, these people don't want to take unlimited losses. Hello? Anyway. Okay, sorry. Well, welcome. We're in the midst of the program. We'll get back to you in a moment. And I show a limitation of a $500,000 cap. So if every claim goes over $500,000, I cut it and only consider $500,000. If I then go down to $250,000, you can see the reduction in the 95th percentile and the reduction in the mean, which is in column F. And I would use that kind of information to judge whether or not the premiums that I'm being offered would make sense, and whether it makes sense to take a $250,000 deductible, or whether it's appropriate. There's not enough credit being given in my expected cost to justify the cost to use the lower premium, the lower retention. So you have a tool. This tool is called At-Risk. It's a computer program that's used in all over the world in all kinds of technical and engineering world, and it's very widely used in most fields other than insurance. I think it could present a real opportunity to allow you to take the data that you've got and provide some better insight to the nature of your claims and risk financing. I'll go back to my other screen just here in a minute. I'm sorry. So, someone just joined the call? Mariah? Mariah? All right, I'm sorry. We'll continue now with another simple exercise that I can give you these slides, and you can do this on your own. But one I think particularly dangerous thing that people can do with statistics is not recognize the nature of how they're actually to be used. This is a simple, very simple combination of, I have operating groups A, B, C, D, and E. Actually, that's kind of blocked.
Hi there. Good morning. Sorry, I was having some mic technical difficulties.
Oh, fine. Well, we're into it, and just give us your name and your company.
My name's Maria Fedorchenko, and I'm from NV Energy.
I see. We'll give you a chance. We're at a point where I think it's a good one to look. We're trying to show the different kinds of ways that people can oftentimes get into trouble with statistics. And one of them is this, that if you had these 5 operating companies with claim counts, as you can see, 100, 50, 500, and sales, and they're trying to look at their sales relative to the frequency of claims. And so they compute a very simple, if you have 100 claims and you have $50 million of sales, you have 2 claims per $1 million of sales. And you can see the numbers that correspond to the different operating units. They range from about 1.5 in unit E to 1 to 3 for unit D. And the question is, how do you then, if somebody has this data and they say to you, well, what's the average for the overall company? What's the right number that represents the combination of all 5 operating units? And the way sometimes people do this, and you have to, not saying you individually, but sometimes computer programs even, they'll just take a simple average of those frequency sales column and come up with a number. And the huge problem that represents is that for the organization as a whole, you have to weight that value in accordance with the size of the individual sales, because the unit D, which has the three value of frequency per sales, is by far the smallest unit. So the correct answer to this process is never to average the ratios. That's 1.97 would result. But to sum the counts, sum the sales, and then divide those. So you're going to be dividing 980 by $590 million to get 1.66, a rather large difference, and something that you always need to check whenever you're dealing with a ratio or a combination of percentages, that you are considering those values over the whole and not the individual values. Any questions or comments, concerns about that? That's a second take-home exercise. But just as a matter of question, out of this group, how many of you work with pivot tables? Shalena, I'll start with you.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. I'm not surprised. Anybody else?
I mean, absolutely. For for most anything dealing with data ends up being kind of pivoted.
Very good. Well, I won't take a lot of time now. I will only say that it's a crucial step, because it allows you to do so much more with a body of data than you ever could do with more traditional approaches, because it's basically a what-if kind of approach. Any of you who aren't using pivot tables, I think if that's one takeaway from this call, learn about them. They are an integral part of Excel. They're very intuitive, and as long as your data is structured properly, they will give you a lot of value. So I'm not going to spend much time at all, but I am going to talk a little bit. These are a few things that again would be on the slide that pivot tables always have got. Is every computer program has that, and I'm sure that those of you who are working with pivot tables have run into a few of these, or maybe all of them. I do want to make one quick comment about how to set up a pivot table. So just give me a moment while I go to that screen. Excuse me. Okay. I'm going to make this screen a little bigger. That's make it. Don't. I think I can get there. Yeah. Okay. I think most of you recognize this is probably a fairly standard listing, a claim listing in Excel, and it is. But I want to make 2 points that I think will allow you to do more with the data that you have. And the first is that unlike most claim tables that you work with, the claims are valued, let's say, as of June 30th or as of December 31st. You know, they're always a particular point in time, and then all the claims are listed and all the kind of data that some of which you see here. There's accident dates. There's, of course, a lot of financial information. There's the nature of the claim. What I would recommend that you do, and you don't do this to throw away everything else, but I would recommend that you consolidate those valuations so that you end up with the ability to look at a claim over time. In other words, take the data that was as of the end of June and take it as of the end of December and pull all this data together into one large data set. Because if you do that, you'll have the ability to look at development in a lot more powerful way than you would if you had to deal with the individual in a much more flexible way as well. So what I'm showing here is I have a colored section of one claim, a claim that was first identified back when the loss date was, if you look at my cursor, was in February 12, 2006. The claim was first identified on a loss run as of 12/30/2006. That's column B. And then we're tracking that claim in its history going forward, whether it was open, closed, whatever happened. I know, obviously, actuaries work with this kind of data all the way, but if you put it all into one table, you're going to find that you can do more with your pivot tables. You can do more to work with the data than I think you otherwise would. The only important gotcha here, though, is because the claim is being repeated, you either have to set a month development point, like 12 months, or you have to set a specific as-of date to avoid having multiple values of the claim in your data. Does that make sense, or is that something you're already doing?
This is Helena Ramsey. Well, majority of our data, actually all our data, has been stored in a SQL database, and we use the pivot tables, only as needed for the purpose of the data that we are extracting. So we actually already using development factors, of claims. Mm-hmm. So we are actually doing something that is very similar.
Well, this could be a good way to check those development factors, which are always, fairly aggregate. And the exciting thing, I think, is that you may find that development is much different in different jurisdictions. It may be different in different types of claims. And while your development factor is correct overall, there may be opportunities to deal into that and find opportunities that could lower development or get a more accurate assessment with this kind of a rifle rather than a shotgun approach. It's not. There's nothing about it that's rocket science, but I believe the closer you get to your data and the more flexible you are with the data, the more value you're going to get out of it. And we're talking about tens of millions of dollars when we put these claims together. So there's a substantial incentive to do it as we talk. So I also, I'm sure I know the answer to this too, but I'm a believer in a thing called lookup, a VLOOKUP function. I won't go into the technology of it. It's a function that exists standard in Excel. It's not hard to use. There's a little bit of work to organize it, but it provides you a critical benefit. And I'll talk about the benefit. I won't talk about the mechanics. You can learn how to do VLOOKUP on your own if you don't already. But the point is, when we get data from a third-party administrator or from a TPA, the data has the age of the claimant, for example, at 25 years old, at 22 years old, whatever it is. But when you think about analyzing data, I could care less about how many claims 26-year-olds have or what characteristics they have. What I'm interested in is maybe between 18 and 25 and get a group of claims that represent those individuals, or maybe the people over 40. And I don't really care about how many 78-year-olds have a claim, and there's probably one or two, but I want to get that group. So a VLOOKUP function allows you to group data and create a new variable. It doesn't in any way replace the detail that you have. I'm certainly not suggesting that you want to throw out all of the detail on age, but it allows you then to group the data in a way that makes for analysis. And this is, I think, a very useful concept. I used age as an example, but it could apply to many, many things. It's a very powerful capability. And again, if you're not using, I would say pivot tables and VLOOKUP belong in the top shelf of your approach toward using Excel. Now let's this call could go on for a few days, so I'll be careful not to completely wipe you out. But regression is a technique that's used in a variety of applications to try to take the existing data and extrapolate it into the future. It sounds very mathematical, and to some degree it is, but it's the most objective way to forecast data. But like any forecasting, you have to be careful about the assumptions that you are making, whether they are implicit or explicit. This is a lot of people whose children, they monitor from the time they're 2 years old, they're 3 years old, and then, on their birthdays they mark a little place on the door hinge there, and keep track of that over time. So if you did this with kids as they were, in 4, 5, 6 years old, and you extrapolated those curves, you'd have a giant. You'd have a kid that's probably going to be 8 feet tall, because that's, we grow so much more rapidly when we're young, and that does not happen as you get older. So if you took a regression line of these kids as their early life, you'd have to be very careful not to extrapolate that to something which would be totally inappropriate, because the underlying model isn't that sort. We grow and then we taper off, and then we become absolute. It goes the other way after a while. That's just an example of where reason always has to trump statistics and mathematics. Now, I'm also a big advocate, coming out of an engineering background and having worked with some of the real people like Dr. Deming in the field of quality control, that measurement is crucial. But one of the biggest problems in our field is that there are very few truly objective measurements, and we tend to follow the example of this Texas sharpshooter who, as you can see here, he shoots the gun, figures out and sees where the pattern is, and then draws the circle around the pattern. That's the way most companies evaluate their risk management. They look at what's happening. They may try and use that as the standard moving forward, but the real question is, what is the real potential? What is ideal? What could you possibly reduce your lost time claims to zero? These are the kind of challenges that, well, I think grow in the industry as it further matures. But for right now, I think the one thing you've got going for you when it comes to measurement is that it involves numbers. Numbers are crucial. Without numbers, all we have is, well, it was pretty good, it was okay, it was fair, there's never an expression that really has any meat to it. And my favorite example about the power of numbers is this picture representing is Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile in 1954, which was a world event, probably the biggest sporting event, certainly of that year, maybe the decade. But the neatest part about his effort was that Roger Bannister was no good super athlete. He was that, but he was also a medical student, and he studied the oxygen intake. He developed a treadmill back in that era. He tested all kinds of ways, and I will get more into it. Running a 4-minute mile is a team sport, not just an individual sport. But when he did all that, and he was able to cross the finish line, you can see that they're probably using those old-fashioned stopwatches there. It only took one number to recognize that he had done this world-breaking event. And that was after a lot of razzmatazz about, who was in the race and who was represented in Queen Anne and Queen Mary or whoever else. They said, and winning the race, Roger Bannister, Oxford University, at a time of 3, and the crowd went crazy because they couldn't care less how much under 4, but he had a under 4-minute mile. It turned out it was about 0.2 of a second under 4 minutes, but nevertheless, he broke something that at that point was considered to be a death-like event, that if you ran under 4 minutes, your heart, your lungs, the combination, you would die. It was not physically possible for a human being to run a 4-minute mile. That truism is being shown false almost every day somewhere in America or the world. But I think the power of that 3 is something we need to keep in mind, because when we do scorecarding, and here's another example, a little more robust example of where I've got now all these criteria that I want to measure, and I've got my organizations across the top there appropriately disguised, and I can use color to indicate the good, which is green, the not very good in the kind of orangey color there, and then the yellow is sort of in the middle. This is what I think management wants out of risk management. They want to see more understanding of all of the kinds of variables and how they can better understand and control the process. The interesting statistic on this graph that are on this table, and the very first one, is we tried to calculate how much the company would benefit if that organization could pull its performance in line with the average, not the best, but just the average. And the numbers are staggering. Organization E would produce a $3.7 million savings to the company if their performance could be brought in line with the average. Almost everyone except for Organization B has a contribution to make for one reason or another. Maybe it's getting claims reported on time. Maybe it's getting more people back to work. Maybe it's better settlement. Whatever, I think having not only the scorecard, but a kind of target of what the benefit could be adds a lot of insight to this kind of an approach. And the scorecard then is kind of a launching point to something I said in the very beginning. It's like, okay, this is what it is. Now, what do we do about it? How can we use allocation? How can we use competitive pressure among our managers? How can we bring these numbers and get people to recognize that if Organization C did it, it's applicable. It should be okay for Organization E to do something very similar. And this is real data. This is not a made-up thing. This is a real group of, I'll say, grocery stores that operate in the different units around the world. And this was used to incent them to make some real improvement. I'm not going to talk about this right now. I just want to cover a couple of basic things about visual stuff, and then I'd like to give you a chance to raise some questions. Our eyes are very, very unique, but they're also very channeled. I don't know how many of you see that we saw the rows here, and that's a problem. We immediately file that away. We're done with it. But you'll notice that there's actually a dolphin swimming in the rows when you look a little more carefully. We don't see that because our brain immediately tells us that the flower, move on to something more interesting. You know, it's not a big deal. I have skills I haven't talked to you about, and one of my skills is, even though this is an electronic discussion and none of us are really together, I can still anticipate something. And I want you all to look at pick one of these 6 cards, only one. I want you to concentrate on that card and think about it so that I can pick up the message I'm getting. Do that for 2 or 3 seconds. And what I'm going to show you, I think quite magically, is that when you see the next slide, I've taken away your card, correct?
Mm-hmm.
I knew which one it was. And of course, the trick is I changed every card. But you
That's
probably
cheating.
like, hello?
That's cheating.
Ah, yes, a lot. This is consulting. There's no rules for that. This is something I gave an attribution here to Stephen Few, who's a professor at the University of California, and is sort of the rising expert in this kind of theory. An interesting guy, and you know, the fascinating part about our field, and I'd say we're all in it in some way, is that it ranges from the most computer type gurus to statistical types, actuary types, loss control types, and then you get into this kind of stuff, which is really worrying about how do you communicate. Because if you have all the answers and you can't communicate them, you know, you really haven't satisfied the need anyway. So I think this is a good way to summarize it and give you a sense of where the potential is in your own organizations. That if you can get people to look at things differently, things are going to change as a result of that. Well, we've gone just over an hour, and I'd like to, rather than me drone on for forever, which, you know, I'll warn you, I've got 2 days of slides here, so you don't want to get into that. I'd like to make the one pitch is that this course, should you choose to come, we try to be as interactive as possible and try to let you bring your data so we can have some people there that can, myself or others, help you apply it and not just leave with a bunch of PowerPoint slides. We try to tie it to your individual needs. I think what's happened is the program in Vancouver is not going to happen because of some logistic problems, but we are going to do one later in the year, and I think it'll be in New York. And I'd welcome you to come to that, or we can talk more about it. I also would like to get your thoughts. If there's anything in this kind of brief introduction, we've talked a little bit about data. We've talked a little bit about some structures of Excel data, of the pivot table, and some of the tools you've got. Like, in fact, I'll circulate that in a minute. I think there are some software that you could buy that is not expensive and could add a lot to your capabilities if you're principally working, say, with Excel. But before I do that, let me just give you a chance to raise any questions or other comments. And you can't hide, you know.
Well, this is Helena, since I was, I'm sorry, I was just really interested in all this project because, well, I like statistics and we have a lot of data that is available. Have you ever dealt, or maybe some of your clients dealt with data indexing?
You mean like benchmarking, or tell me what you mean by data index?
Well, when I was looking at your slide when you had, I believe, 3 types of distribution, and you were talking about the simulation and the probability of the claim being within this range and that range. For TrueBlue as an organization, we are standing a little bit unique in regards to claim population and the business because we are never the same. If I will analyze the data from one policy year to another policy year, and I will see, oh my gosh, I have a huge spike in claim type X, and I have higher frequency and higher, higher net incurred. For me, it might not even tell anything because the business mix changed. If in policy year X I have 30% of construction business, and in policy year Y I have 50% of construction business, that's not the same data. So if I'm going to see increase, it's not because my safety procedures are bad or I have a problem, but because the whole population is different. The business mix is different.
No, it's a very legitimate question, and I think I know you're not unique in that sense, but it probably is a little more extreme.
Right.
The only way to deal with that, Helena, is to tie the data back to the underlying exposures. I think this is a good example. We're working right now with a group of large retail grocery stores. It's not Kroger, but Kroger would be an example. I think they operate where you are. And we can't interpret that data without breaking it out into the types of jobs that exist from year to year. So exactly what you said, if they open up a new deli operation that has a lot more injuries associated, we've got to bring that into the evaluation because that is causing losses to go up, but it's also obviously bringing in additional revenue, and it's a business direction that they want to take. I think that the simple answer to your process is I think we've talked a little bit about having exposures, but also having maybe some indices from a broader base like an NCCI, where we could you could evaluate your mix of exposures and determine how well you're doing relative to that mix. But you need to. I don't think you're going to solve your problem with the loss data alone. Just like you said, you're going to have to go outside of that. But there's some great tools out there to do this. The statistical tools, once you get the data, are really amazing. And I think you'd find that you could get a lot more insight once you have developed a little something that's in addition to your claim information.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? You're welcome. Anybody else? Questions, comments?
Are you having another class similar to this at RIMS week?
Well, there's a session. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. That was my question.
There's a session at RIMS Wednesday morning on visualization, and some of this material, although I haven't gotten much into visualization, we're going to cover that. So I would hope if you're going to be at RIMS, I'd love to see you there. It's Wednesday morning. I believe it starts at 10:15, and it's called Data Visualization or something like that.
Okay. Thank you. Data visualization.
You've got my information. If you have any trouble finding the class, just give me an email and I'll make sure you get what you need.
Oh, it's the Why Am I Here? Quantifying the Value of a Risk Professional?
No, not that it.
Oh, wait. Visual analysis, the value of graphics for risk communications.
That's it.
That's it. Okay.
Standing room only.
Oh, okay.
Let me. I'm going to skip a few things, but I want to show you. This is some of the graphics that we can get into. But I think this is kind of cute. If you ask somebody and you see something like this, how many nines? Obviously they have to go through the process and actually count them. But if you color the nines, it's trivial. And this is another example of how your brain can work. And hopefully you're not colorblind, but the answer of 6 is pretty easy to see. Here's some thoughts about some capabilities that you may want to consider. Tableau is, you can go on their website, you can actually get a free a trial use of the program. Fantastic capabilities in graphics. It puts Excel to shame, and honestly. But it does work against an Excel source. So if you've got Excel data, you can work with Tableau in about 5 minutes. I really think it's a find, and we're working very closely to try to take advantage of its capabilities, which are growing. This at-risk program is a Palisade software product. It's crucial if you're going to want to go into the simulation and modeling area. It probably isn't appropriate for everybody, but it's a very solid and very well established tool beyond, but it's also an Excel base. So in fact, at-risk becomes an add-in to Excel. You don't have to worry about learning a lot if you have Excel skills. And JUMP is part of SAS. It's the interactive capability within SAS. And again, it's more specialized than a Tableau. But if you're looking for computer tools, it really does offer a great deal. And we would, in our course, give you opportunities to look at all of these and see which makes sense. It's an independent choice. We're not selling anything, and we have no connection financially with any of these vendors. But those are thoughts that you might, beyond some of the ones we already talked about, directions that you could benefit by having more power over your data. I take it at least Alita is going to be at RIMS. Anybody else? All you West Coast people are going to stay on the West Coast?
Yeah, I'm missing it this year, unfortunately.
I'm not going to be at risk, but my boss, Mike Compagna, is going to be.
All right. Well, I hope that, if anything, you've gotten some flavor of the type of things that we're trying to cover in this RIMS program, the workshop that will be later in the year. But on the other hand, this is a kind of situation where everybody's needs are fairly unique. And if you, I'd be happy to respond to your questions by email or phone to just to see what advice we might be able to offer. I think we're all still learning in this area, and the more we can learn to network together, the more effective we're going to be. Is there anything else? I don't want to keep you from your Easter weekend here, but of course the folks on the West Coast got more time anyway. Well, I appreciate your interest and follow-up. I'm sorry the program in San Diego was canceled. That was not my idea, and my wife is still complaining about it, wanting to get a few days in the sun down there. But what can you do?
Thank you very much, Rick. That was very helpful.
Well, thank you. I look forward to meeting you all in person.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
You too.
Bye-bye.